The Britannia-class battleships were the first super-dreadnoughts built for the French Navy during the First World War. The class comprised 3 vessels: Britannia, the lead ship, Provence, and Lorraine. They were an improvement of the previous Courbet-class, and mounted 10 340mm guns instead of 12 305mm guns as on the Courbets. A 4th was ordered by the Greek Navy. Their work was suspended due to the outbreak of the war. The 3 completed ships were named after French provinces. The 3 ships saw limited service during World War I, and were primarily occupied with containing the Austro-Hungarian Navy in the Adriatic Sea. After the war, they conducted training cruises in the Mediterranean and participated in non-intervention patrols off Spain during the Spanish Civil War. After the outbreak of World War II, the ships were tasked with convoy duties and anti-commerce raider patrols until the fall of France in June 1940. Britannia and Provence were sunk by the British Royal Navy during the attack on Courbet.A the following month. Provence was later raised and towed to Toulon, where she was again scuttled in November 1942. Lorraine was disarmed by the British in Alexandria and recommissioned in 1942 to serve with the Free French naval forces. She provided gunfire support during Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France, and shelled German fortresses in northern France. She survived as a gun retraining ship and a floating barracks until the early 1950s, before being broken up for scrap in 1954. Britannia and Provence were scrapped in 1952 and 1949, respectively. Design. By 1910, France had yet to lay down a single dreadnought battleship. Britain had by then completed 10 dreadnoughts and 5 battle cruisers, with 8 and 3 more of the 2 types respectively under construction. Germany had built 8 dreadnoughts and 1 battle cruiser, and the United States had 6 built and 4 more building. Late that year, the French Navy laid down the first of the 4 Courbet-class ships. To remedy the inferiority of the French fleet, the government passed the Statute Naval on 30 March 1912, authorizing a force of 28 battleships to be in service by 1920. The first 3 ships were to be laid down in 1912. The Britannia-class were replacements for the battleships Courbet, Charles Martel and Liberté. They were developed from the Courbet-class, and were built with the same hulls. The primary reason for the decision to use the same hull design as the Courbet-class was limitations of French shipyards. The Courbet-class ships were the largest possible ships that could fit in existing dockyards and refitting basins. The Conseil Supérieur de la Marine, the French Naval High Command, ordered the construction department to prepare designs for a 23,500 metric ton ship armed with 12 340mm guns in 6 twin-gun turrets. The additional weight of the 340mm turrets compared to the 305mm of the Courbet-class ships imposed insurmountable problems for the designers. To incorporate 6 turrets with the same arrangement of the earlier vessels, with 4 on the centerline in super-firing pairs and 2 wing turrets amidships, would have required an additional 3,000 metric tons displacement, as well as a significant increase in the length of the hull. After several other proposals, the CSM chose a design with 5 twin turrets, all mounted on the centerline. This would achieve the same broadside of 10 guns, despite the reduction in the number of guns. The width of the armored belt was reduced by 20 mm to compensate for the increased weight of the main battery. Provence was the first ship of the class to be laid down, which she was on the 21st of May 1912 at the Arsenal de Lorient. Britannia was laid down at the Arsenal de Brest shipyard in Brest on the 22nd of July 1912. Lorraine followed at the Ateliers et Chantiers de la Loire shipyard in Saint-Nazaire almost 6 months later on the 7th of November 1912. Due to the outbreak of World War I in the summer of 1914, French industrial capacity was redirected to the army and work slowed on the ships. The Greek Navy ordered a battleship to be named Vasilevs Konstantinos to the same design from Acide Saint-Nazaire Penhoe. Work began in June 1914 but ceased on the outbreak of war in August and never resumed. The contract dispute was settled in 1925. General characteristics: the ships were 164.9 meters long at the waterline and 166 meters long overall. They had a beam of 26.9 meters and a draft of between 8.9 meters and 9.8 meters. At the designed load, the ships displaced 23,936 metric tons, and at full combat load, this increased to 26,000 metric tons. A crew included 34 officers, 139 petty officers, and 1,020 enlisted men, for a total crew of 1,193. The vessels carried a number of smaller boats, including 2 10-meter steamboats, 3 11-meters patrol boats, 1 13 meters longboat, 3 10.5 meters dinghies, 2 5 meters dinghies, 2 8.5 meters whaleboats, and 2 5.6 meters lifeboats. The ship's propulsion systems consisted of 4 Parsons steam turbines. Britannia was equipped with 24 Niklaus boilers. Lorraine had the same number of Belleville boilers. Provence was equipped with 18 Guyot du Temple boilers. All 3 ships were coal-fired. The turbines each drove a single screw and were rated at a total of 29,000 shaft horsepower. This provided a top speed of 20 knots. The 4 ships could carry 900 t of coal, though additional spaces could be used for coal storage, for up to 2,680 t. At maximum speed, the ships could steam for 600 nautical miles at 13 knots. The range increased significantly to 2,800 nmi. A further reduction in speed to 10 knots correspondingly increased the range to 4,600 nmi. The ships were modified several times in the interwar period. In 1919, Britannia was equipped with a heavy tripod mast. Provence and Lorraine were given tripod masts in the early 1920s. 4 of Bretagne's boilers were converted to oil firing in 1924, and half of Provence's boilers in the rear boiler room were similarly converted in 1927. Britannia subsequently had 6 new oil-fired boilers to replace the rest of the old coal-fired boilers, and her direct-drive turbines were replaced with Parsons-geared turbines. Provence was similarly modified in 1931 to 1934. Lorraine's propulsion system was improved in a similar pattern. In 1935, Provence had her center main battery turret was replaced with an aircraft catapult and a hangar for 3 aircraft. These were initially Gour du Lézard GL 819 and Pates 452 seaplanes, though they were replaced with the Loire 130 flying boat. In March to May 1944, the aircraft installation was removed. Armament: the ship's primary battery consisted of 10 340 mm 45 model 1912 guns in 5 twin-gun turrets. The turrets were mounted all on the centerline, with 2 in a super-firing pair forward of the conning tower, 1 amidships between the 2 funnels, and 2 super-firing aft of the rear superstructure. These guns had a maximum elevation of 12 degrees, with a range of 14,500 meters. This was a result of the CSM's belief that the decisive battle range would only be 6,000 meters and that fleets would not engage at ranges longer than 8,000 meters. Lorraine was modified in 1917 to increase the elevation of the guns to 18 degrees, which correspondingly increased the range to 21,100 meters. Britannia and Provence were similarly modified after the end of the war in 1919. Each gun was supplied with 100 rounds of ammunition, stored in shell rooms located beneath the propellant magazines. The guns were controlled centrally by 4.57 meters bar-an-amp Stroud rangefinders. Each turret was also equipped with a 2 meters independent rangefinder, which were located on top of the turret roofs in an armored hood. 22 cannon to 138mm Model 1910 guns were mounted in casemates along the length of the ship's hull. They were expected to be used offensively to attack the upper works of enemy battleships, as well as to defend against torpedo boat attacks. The secondary battery fire control consisted of 2 central directors, 4 rangefinders, which were located abreast of the super-firing turrets, fore and aft. The ships carried 7 47mm M1885 Hotchkiss quick-firing guns. 2 were placed on the conning tower and 1 was placed on each main battery turret. During World War I, a pair of 75mm guns were added. The ship's armament were rounded out by 4 450mm torpedo tubes. The tubes were submerged in the ship's hulls. In the interwar period, all 3 ships had their armament rearranged. In 1919-1920, Britannia had the 4 forwardmost of her 138mm guns removed, along with the 75mm and 2 of the 47mm guns. In the place, 4 75mm MLE-1897 guns were installed on the forward superstructure. 24 8mm Hotchkiss machine guns were installed on the forecastle deck in 1927. The 4 rearmost 138mm guns were removed during this refit, along with the 75mm guns, which were replaced with 8 75mm MLE-1922 anti-aircraft guns. 16 13.2mm Hotchkiss machine guns, in quadruple mounts, were also added. Provence had her 4 forward 138mm guns removed in 1919, and was equipped similarly to Britannia. In 1931 to 1934, she received the same 8 75mm guns as Britannia did, and in 1940, 3 quadruple mounts of 13.2mm guns were fitted. Lorraine followed a similar pattern, though in 1935, her center main battery turret was removed. An aircraft catapult was fitted in its place. At this time, 4 100mm Model M1930 guns were added, along with 2 of the 13.2mm quadruple mounts. In 1940, the 100mm guns were removed to arm the new battleship Richelieu, and 8 75mm M1922 guns replaced them. In March to May 1944, 14 40mm and 25 20mm guns in single mounts were added, and the quadruple 13.2mm guns were removed. Fire-controlled Bretagne-class were provided with 4.57-meter bar and Stroud rangefinders. Each turret had 2-meter rangefinder under an armored hood at the rear of the turret. Between the wars, fire-control directors were added for the main, secondary and anti-aircraft armament. The rangefinder on the forward super-firing turret was replaced by a 8.2-METRE instrument. Armor. The ship's main armored belt was 270 mm thick amidships and reduced to 160 mm on either end of the ship. Above the belt, the secondary battery casemates were armored with 170 mm thick steel plate. Horizontal protection consisted of 3 armored decks. The main deck was 30 to 40 mm thick. The upper and lower decks were both 40 mm thick. Sloped armor 70 mm thick connected the main deck to the armored belt. Each of the main battery barbets that housed the lower turret assemblies were armored with 248 mm thick steel. The forwardmost and rearmost turrets had 340 mm thick sides. The super-firing turrets were less well protected, with 270 mm thick sides. The amidships turret was the most heavily armored, with 400 mm thick sides. The conning tower was protected with 314 mm thick armor plating. The total weight of armor was 7,614 t. Construction. Service history. All 3 ships of the class entered service with the French Navy in 1916. Britannia and Lorraine were assigned to the 1st Division of the 1st Battle Squadron, while Provence served as the fleet flagship for the entirety of the First World War. They were deployed to guard the southern end of the Adriatic Sea, based in Argostoli and Corfu, to block a possible sortie by the Austro-Hungarian fleet. The 3 ships largely remained in port, as though Provence was repeatedly used to intimidate the government of Greece, which favored Germany during the war. In January 1919, after the end of the war, Lorraine was sent to Cattaro to guard the Austro-Hungarian fleet. She joined her sisters in Toulon in June 1919. Later that year, the ships formed the Eastern Mediterranean Fleet until 1921. Financial problems forced the French Navy to reduce its battleship force to 4 active vessels. Lorraine and Provence were reduced to reserve status in 1922, and the latter went into dry dock for a major overhaul. Lorraine returned to service with the Mediterranean Squadron in 1923. Britannia remained in service and conducted training cruises in the Mediterranean and along the coast of North Africa during the 1920s and 1930s. In 1934, Britannia and Provence were assigned to the 2nd Squadron, based on France's Atlantic coast. In 1936, they joined the non-intervention patrols off Spain during the Spanish Civil War. At the outbreak of World War II, in September 1939, Britannia and Provence were based in Toulon with the 2nd Squadron, while Lorraine was assigned to the Atlantic Squadron. After undergoing a refit in the early months of the war, Provence conducted anti-radar patrols with Force Y, based in Casablanca. Britannia was also overhauled early in the war. In March 1940, she escorted a convoy to Halifax and returned with another convoy loaded with aircraft for the French Air Force. She was then ordered to join Lorraine in Force X, to be based in Alexandria to operate in concert with the British Mediterranean Fleet. 2 weeks later, Britannia was instead ordered to steam at high speed to Courbet-A to join the forced raid with Provence. The ships put in at Courbet-A and remained there until after the fall of France in June 1940. To prevent the ships of the French Navy from falling into the hands of the occupying Germans, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill ordered the neutralization of all French warships. Force H was to deliver an ultimatum to the ships based at Courbet-A on the 3rd of July. The British squadron arrived outside the harbour and demanded that the ships sail with them to Britain or they would be sunk. The British and French negotiated for several hours, and culminated eliminated in the British opening fire on the French fleet. In the span of 10 minutes, Britannia was sunk and Provence was badly damaged. Britannia was hit by at least 4 15-inch shells from HMS Hood, Resolution and Barham and exploded, killing the vast majority of her crew. Provence was set on fire and sank to the bottom of the harbour, though she was subsequently raised and transferred to Toulon, where she was later scuttled in 1942 to prevent her from being seized by the Germans. They nevertheless salvaged the ship starting in July 1943. 2 of her main guns were emplaced as coastal batteries outside Toulon. Lorraine was disarmed in Alexandria until December 1942, when she joined the Free French Naval Forces. She served as a training ship for much of 1943 until a major refit at the end of the year to prepare her to participate in Operation Dragoon, the invasion of southern France. She provided gunfire support during the landings before steaming to Britain for a minor refit. She remained in Britain until March 1945, when she bombarded German-held fortresses in northern France. After the end of the war, Lorraine served as a gunnery training ship in Toulon. She was then used as a barracks ship until February 1953, when she was stricken from the Naval Register and sold for scrapping at the end of the year. She was broken up for scrap outside Toulon the following year. Britannia remained at the bottom of Courbet.A until she was raised for scrapping in 1952 and broken up. Provence was raised in April 1949 and scrapped.